I'd made her favorite lemon chicken with rosemary potatoes, just like I used to make when she was little and had bad days at school. Back then, it always made things better. I even picked up a bottle of that overpriced Chardonnay she once called the only white wine worth drinking. The table was set for two, candles flickering low. The small dining room never felt so large. The clock on the wall ticked louder as it passed. 6, 0, then 6, 15. At 6:37, my phone lit up. Emily. I smiled before I answered. Hey, sweetheart. Everything okay? Her voice came through bright, breathless, distracted. Hey, Dad. Listen, Travis and I got invited to this last-minute thing. It's this networking dinner, kind of a big deal. I meant to tell you earlier, but well, you know how the day gets away from you. I didn't speak right away. My eyes drifted to the empty chair across from me. The wine bottle stood unopened. So, you're not coming. A pause. Then a chirpy. Can we do next weekend? I'll make it up to you, promise. Maybe brunch? I forced a smile she couldn't see. Sure, Em. Next weekend sounds good. Love you, she said, already halfway off the line. The phone went dead. I set it back on the table and stared at the flickering candles. The food was still warm. I sat down anyway, cutting into the chicken with the dull side of my knife. It was tender, perfectly seasoned. I'd followed the recipe the way I used to like a ritual. The house was too quiet. I took one bite, then another, chewing slowly. I'd told myself not to expect too much. She was busy. She had a life. I looked at the clock again. 7:03. Her mother used to say I spoiled her, that I gave too much, that one day she'd stop appreciating it. I didn't believe it back then. I believed love always came back around. Now the silence in the room was heavier than the years. The potatoes went cold on the plate. The candles burned lower. I poured a glass of wine, just one, and raised it toward the empty chair. To next weekend, I whispered. If you remember. To next weekend. Chapter 2. A Life of Sacrifice. Emily was 5 when cancer took her mother. I still remember the way she held my hand at the funeral, her tiny fingers gripping mine like she thought I'd disappear too. I didn't cry that day, not because I wasn't broken, but because she needed someone solid, someone to anchor her while the world tipped sideways. We lived in that little yellow house off Delmar Street. Rent was cheap, and the furnace rattled every time it kicked on. I taught high school math during the day, then ran night shifts at the gas station just to keep us fed. Emily never knew about the shutoff notices. The nights I skipped dinner, so she wouldn't have to. I'd tell her I'd already eaten at work. She believed me. Kids always believe their fathers until they don't. I missed every poker night, every guy's trip, every invitation to come out for a beer. There was no room for anything but survival. Emily's ballet classes, field trips, doctor visits. Every check I wrote was with shaking hands and a held breath. I sold my baseball card collection to buy her braces, took out a second loan so she could have the flute she wanted for marching band. Didn't blink when her college acceptance letter arrived, just opened another credit card, and smiled like I wasn't terrified. I still have the photos. Her 8th grade graduation, the dance where she wore her mother's necklace. I was always in the background, holding a coat, taking the picture, beaming like a fool. I used to believe that love meant giving without limits, that if you poured enough into someone, they'd never forget where they came from. I worked until my back gave out, retired early from teaching, not by choice but because the doctors said my spine had taken all it could. I cashed out my pension early penalty and all to help with Emily's wedding. She wanted a venue with a garden and a string quartet. I gave it to her, even if it meant putting off a new roof from my house another year. Love, I thought, was enough. It had to be. But sacrifice is a quiet currency. You spend it all, thinking the world is watching, and one day, you realize no one even kept the receipts. It didn't happen overnight. That's the thing no one tells you. People don't change in some grand, sweeping moment. They change in pieces, little by little, until one day you look at them and realize you don't recognize the person standing in front of you. Emily had once been the kind of girl who wrote thank you notes on scented stationery. Now, at 27, freshly married and armed with a degree and a condo she didn't pay for, she sent one-word texts and rarely called unless she needed something. The sweetness faded first. That gentle softness in her voice when she used to say, "Hi, Daddy," turned clinical, curt. "Hey," like she was always halfway to something more important. She started talking about networking and investments and how people our age didn't understand the way things worked anymore. She laughed less, smiled less. And when she did smile, it didn't quite reach her eyes. Her husband, Travis, didn't help. He was all sharp edges and smoother than he should be charm. The kind of man who called you sir to your face and rolled his eyes the second you turned around. Emily defended him constantly. "He's just driven," she'd say. Or, "He's under pressure." But I'd seen the way he looked at her when she spoke out of turn. Like she was a temporary inconvenience, not a partner. And I'd seen the way she shrunk a little each time he corrected her. Her world had narrowed into curated brunches, yoga classes, and social media posts captioned with things like "blessed and grateful," though she never seemed either. The condo was all sterile white and faux gold. Not a single thing handmade. Not a single photograph of us. Just engagement photos in soft focus and monogram towels. Her life looked like a magazine spread. Cold. Perfect. Hollow. She used to call me when she couldn't sleep. Used to cry on the phone and ask what Mom would do. Now, when I called, it went to voicemail more often than not. "Hey, it's Emily. Leave a message." That cheery recording, so at odds with the silence that followed. It wasn't just distance. It was erasure. Like the girl I raised had been replaced with someone new. Someone who'd rewritten the story of her life and edited me out entirely. Chapter 4. The tense visit. The first thing I noticed was the shoes. A row of designer heels lined up by the door like some kind of curated exhibit. Travis opened the door before I had the chance to knock again. "Daniel," he said, as if the name itself was something bitter he'd swallowed by accident. The condo smelled like lavender and bleach. Everything inside was angular and expensive looking, with an edge of discomfort. The kind of place you lived in to impress other people, not to be at peace. "Hey, Dad," Emily called from the kitchen, not bothering to come greet me. She was already stirring something on the stove. Too busy to meet my eyes, Travis motioned half-heartedly toward the couch. "You can sit if you want." I wanted to ask how they were. I wanted to hug her. I wanted her to look at me like she used to when I brought home her favorite peppermint hot chocolate from the corner cafe. Instead, I lowered myself onto a couch that felt like it had never been used and nodded politely while Travis scrolled through something on his phone. Dinner was served without ceremony. Quinoa salad, tofu, something green and unrecognizable. "We've been trying to eat clean," Emily said, placing a bowl in front of me like she was feeding a stranger. "You'll get used to it. I still make that rosemary chicken sometimes," I offered gently. "Your mom's recipe." She barely looked up. Too heavy. We ate in silence. The only sounds were the clink of forks and Travis sighing every time I asked a question he didn't deem important. When I asked about her work, she said, "Busy." When I asked about their honeymoon, she shrugged. It was fine. At one point, I reached for a framed photo on the side table her wedding day. Smiling, sunlight in her eyes. Travis cleared his throat before I could pick it up. "Please don't touch that. The frame's antique." I nodded, slowly setting my hand back in my lap. The table I'd made for her first apartment had been long replaced. The bookshelf I built from reclaimed oak? Gone. Not a trace of me in this space. Not a trace of her former self. By the time dessert fruit slices, no sugar was served. I knew I wouldn't be invited back anytime soon, and I wasn't sure I'd accept, even if I was. The restaurant was one of those dimly lit places with music you couldn't hum and prices you didn't say out loud. Travis had chosen it something about Michelin stars and making the right impression. I wore my best blazer, the one with frayed cuffs I hoped no one would notice. Emily had insisted we all go out. Family night, she'd called it. But nothing about the night felt like family. It was Emily, Travis, his parents, the Whitmore Sand, me. They arrived late, all cologne, jewelry, and judgment. Mrs. Whitmore gave me a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Mr. Whitmore offered a handshake like I was interviewing for a job I wasn't qualified for. We ordered. Conversation dripped along like a leaky faucet. They asked Travis about work, Emily about her influencer nonsense, and politely ignored me until Mrs. Whitmore asked, "So, Mr. Reed, what do you do these days?" "I'm retired now. I taught high school math for 35 years. A noble profession," she said, with a tone that made it sound like she was offering condolences. Emily laughed suddenly, loud enough to draw glances from nearby tables. "You know what's funny? Growing up, Dad thought being a good parent meant showing up to parent-teacher conferences and paying bills." I blinked. "I thought it meant keeping a roof over your head and food on the table." Travis smirked behind his wine glass. Emily leaned in. "Yeah, but not once did we talk about feelings, or dreams, or even college. It was always, 'What's the practical choice, Emily?'" My throat went tight. "You never lacked for anything." She waved her fork in the air, like she was conducting an orchestra. "Exactly. Nothing but structure and rules, and zero emotional intelligence. If it weren't for Travis, I wouldn't even know how to talk about what I feel." The table went quiet. I looked around and realized everyone was watching me like I was an unwelcome relic, a guest at a dinner meant to humiliate me. "I did my best," I said softly. Emily shrugged. "Sometimes your best isn't good enough." The check arrived. I paid it, of course. Travis didn't reach for his wallet. Emily didn't say thank you. I walked out into the cold night air with the sting of her words in my ears, the kind that don't bruise skin but break something deeper. Chapter 6. You never did enough. The phone call came the next afternoon. I'd barely made it halfway through my leftover stew when the screen lit up with Emily's name. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Dad, we need to talk." Her voice was clipped, sharp. Not angry, exactly more like rehearsed. "About last night?" I asked. She scoffed. "About everything. Travis and I have been talking, and there's a lot I've been holding in for years." I leaned back in my recliner, already bracing for the blow. "You never did enough for me," she began. "Not emotionally. Not when Mom died. You buried yourself in work and left me to figure everything out on my own. I needed a parent, not a roommate who made sure the fridge was full." My hands curled into fists, resting on the blanket across my lap. "Emily, I was grieving too, and I did what I thought was right. I showed up. I stayed. But you didn't connect." She cut in. "You never asked how I was feeling. You didn't comfort me. I cried myself to sleep so many nights, and you never noticed." I closed my eyes. The image of her at 10 years old, curled under the covers with her mother's scarf, hit me like a hammer. I'd knocked gently, left a glass of water by her bedside, stood outside the door, and listened until the sobs stopped. I didn't know how to fix it, but I never walked away. "You make it sound like I wasn't there at all," I said. "Like I didn't give you everything I had. You gave money and structure. But love, you held that too close. Travis sees it. He's helped me understand how much damage that caused." "Travis, of course. He's not your therapist, Emily." "No," she snapped. "He's my husband, and he sees things you don't." There was a silence, heavy and suffocating. I heard her breathing on the other end. Quick. Tight. I loved you the only way I knew how, I said finally. I just thought that would be enough. Well, she said, cold and distant. It wasn't. The line went dead. Just like that. Another verdict handed down. Another piece of me, carved away and discarded. It was the kind of autumn morning Maria used to love, mist rising off the grass, air crisp with just a hint of wood smoke from distant chimneys. I wore the navy blazer she always said brought out my eyes, and brought daisies, not roses. She hated rose-scald them. Funeral flowers! Daisies made her laugh. Said they looked like they didn't take themselves too seriously. The cemetery was quiet, as it always was, except for the low hum of wind weaving through the old elms. I knelt beside her headstone, brushing away a few leaves. The granite had weathered some over the years, but her name still looked fresh, like it refused to age without her. Happy anniversary, my love, I whispered. My voice sounded thin in the morning stillness. I set the flowers down and sat on the bench we'd donated after her funeral. Maria would have liked that. A place for others to rest. I checked my phone once around noon. No missed calls. No messages. I told myself maybe she was just busy. At 3:17 p.m., a text came in. From Emily. Do you know if that old espresso machine is still in the garage? That was it. No mention of the date. No acknowledgement. Just another request. Another thing to take. I typed, yes, it's still there. Then stared at the blinking cursor. I thought about adding, today would have been 34 years, but deleted it before I hit send. What would be the point? She wouldn't remember. Or worse, she did and just didn't care. Maria would have known. She never forgot things that mattered. I stayed until the sun dipped behind the hills and the shadows stretched long across the stones. I told her about the garden, how the tomatoes had come in late this year, how the upstairs faucet still leaked, no matter how many times I fixed it. I told her about Emily, how she'd grown into someone neither of us would recognize. And when I couldn't talk anymore, I just sat in silence beside her, hand resting against the stone like it might still be warm. As I stood to leave, I looked back once more and said the words I always said. I'm trying, Maria. I really am. But that day, for the first time, I wasn't sure it was true. Chapter 8. The heated argument. It started with a lamp. A stupid, crooked, overpriced lamp. We were in her condo again, Travis out at some client dinner that probably involved cocktails and egos. I'd brought over a box of old things she left in my attic. Things I thought she might want. Photo albums, report cards, the teddy bear she once refused to sleep without for 5 years straight. She barely glanced at the box. Dad, we don't really have room for old junk. Couldn't you have texted first? I thought you'd want to go through it. She sighed, like I'd interrupted something sacred. Honestly, you should have asked. Travis doesn't like clutter. I looked around the sterile condo. Not a book out of place, not a single photo of her childhood anywhere. Well, I said carefully, Travis doesn't seem to like much of anything, does he? Her head snapped up. What's that supposed to mean? It means this place doesn't feel like you. It feels curated, like a showroom, like you've been edited out. She crossed her arms. You don't get to criticize my life just because it doesn't look like yours. I stayed quiet for a moment, gathering myself. Emily, I'm not criticizing, I just... Stop calling me Emily like you know me. Her voice sharpened. You don't. You never did. I stared at her, stunned. You think showing up with boxes of memories makes up for years of emotional absence? She snapped. You were always too busy, too tired, too distracted to actually see me. That's not fair, I said quietly. No. What's not fair is having a father who thinks being physically present is the same as parenting. My heart thundered in my chest. I was doing the best I could. Well, maybe your best wasn't enough, she shot back. God. Sometimes I wish. She stopped herself, eyes flashing. What? I asked, voice low. Say it. She looked at me like she was seeing through me. Sometimes I wish you weren't my father. The words hit with surgical precision. No flinch, no hesitation, just the flat, unfeeling truth she'd apparently been holding on to for years. I nodded once. Okay, I said. She blinked, confused. Okay? Okay, I repeated. If that's how you feel, then maybe it's time we both start acting like it. I picked up the box, turned, and walked out. She didn't stop me. The hallway outside her condo felt longer than I remembered, like every step took something out of me. The box of forgotten memories felt heavier now, though I knew it wasn't the weight of paper and stuffed animals. It was something else, something that sat on my chest like grief. By the time I reached my truck, my hands were trembling. I set the box gently on the passenger seat, closed the door, and just sat there for a moment, staring at the steering wheel like it might offer me an answer. She meant it. That was the worst part. Emily didn't scream those words out of momentary anger. She didn't flinch, didn't backpedal. She'd been waiting to say it. She'd let that rot fester long enough to believe it. Sometimes I wish you weren't my father. I turned the key. The engine hummed to life, steady and oblivious. The drive home was a blur of red lights and blurred street signs. I couldn't remember which roads I took. Just that I didn't turn the radio on. Didn't want anything breaking the silence. My head replayed every birthday party, every scraped knee, every late night I sat at the kitchen table with bills spread out, calculating how to afford dance lessons and groceries in the same week. Had it all meant nothing? I thought of her wedding day, how she'd squeezed my hand and said, "You're the best man I know." And now I was the man she wished she'd never known at all. I pulled into my driveway just after sunset. The porch light flickered, another thing I hadn't gotten around to fixing. The house looked tired, same as me. I sat in the truck for a long while. Engine off, but heart still racing. Then I reached over, opened the glove compartment, and took out the photo I always kept there. Me, Maria, and a 7-year-old Emily at the lake. Her curls still wild, her eyes still bright. Back when she used to call me her hero. I stared at that photo until my vision blurred, until the night swallowed the truck, until the only sound left was my own breath, slow, shallow, tired. And for the first time since Maria died, I asked myself a question I never thought I'd have to. Was I ever enough? Chapter 10. The quiet before the shift. The house felt like a museum quiet, too clean, full of ghosts. I carried the box inside and set it on the kitchen table without looking at it. I didn't turn on the lights, just stood in the dim twilight bleeding through the windows. The clock ticked on the wall. The furnace kicked on. The silence felt loud. I walked into the living room, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight. The photo shelf stared back at me. Maria, in her garden hat. Emily, front tooth missing, holding a handmade Father's Day card. The three of us in Yellowstone, arms tangled together, smiles as wide as the horizon behind us. I ran my fingers over the glass frames. Dust clung to the edges. I hadn't cleaned them in weeks, maybe months. I sat down in my recliner, the cushion forming around me like muscle memory. I stared at those pictures and wondered where it all had gone wrong. I gave her everything. My time, my money, my strength. I gave her the last good years of my back and the best years of my patience. I sacrificed the man I could have been to make sure she could become whoever she wanted. And now she stood in a condo I helped pay for, beside a man I never trusted, and told me I wasn't wanted. Maria used to warn me, in that gentle way of hers, don't give her so much that she forgets to be grateful. I laughed it off. Said love didn't keep score. Maybe it should have. I sat there for hours, not moving, not speaking, just thinking. Not just about Emily, but about myself, about how small I'd made my world trying to hold on to someone who didn't want to be held. about how much I'd given and how little I'd asked for in return. And then something shifted. It wasn't anger. Not quite. More like clarity. Like stepping outside and realizing the fog has lifted. The ache in my chest didn't go away, but it hardened into something cleaner, something steadier. She didn't want me as her father? Fine. But I wasn't going to keep playing the part for an audience that had left the theater. Something had to change. Starting now. I stood up, walked to the kitchen drawer, and pulled out the folder Maria always called our what-ifs. Inside was the deed, the will, the power of attorney. It was time to start remembering who this house really belonged to. Me. The law office smelled like old carpet and stronger coffee. It sat tucked between a dentist's clinic and a shuttered travel agency. Nothing flashy, just quiet and unassuming. The kind of place you went when you needed real help, not fancy brochures. A little plaque on the door read, Martin Ellery, Family Law and Estate Planning. I sat in the waiting room longer than I expected, flipping through a magazine about luxury cabins I couldn't afford, until a secretary with kind eyes led me into a narrow office lined with bookcases and family photos. Martin stood as I entered, a stocky man in his early 60s, with salt and pepper hair and the face of someone who'd seen too much and judged none of it. Daniel Reed, he said, offering a firm handshake. We spoke on the phone. Thanks for seeing me on short notice, I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. He opened a notebook, clicked his pen. So, what brings you in? I paused, cleared my throat. Let's call it a hypothetical. Say you have one child. Grown. Estranged. You gave her everything. Time, money, college, a wedding, the whole works. And now, let's say she makes it pretty clear she wishes you weren't her father anymore. Martin nodded, listening without flinching. Hypothetically, he repeated, scribbling something down. And what would this hypothetical father like to know? Can you disown an adult child? Legally? A faint smile touched his lips. Not mocking, just knowing. You can revise your will, remove them from any power of attorney arrangements, and make it clear they're not entitled to any portion of your estate. It's more common than you think. Some even include a specific clause, so there's no question the omission was intentional. Would it hold up? I asked. He nodded. Absolutely. As long as you're of sound mind and there's documentation, it's rock solid. I exhaled slowly, the air leaving me like an untied balloon. What if, I added, instead of family, the estate went to charity, scholarships, a community fund, something that actually helps people? That's your call, he said gently. Your legacy. You get to choose where it lands. I looked around his office, at the framed photo of his daughter on the shelf. Then maybe it's time I started rewriting mine. Chapter 12. The Will Revision. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Cold metal, weighted just right for signatures that change things forever. Martin sat across from me, flipping pages with the quiet professionalism of a man who'd walked dozens of people through this exact moment. Except this time, it was mine. He pointed to the line. Here's where you remove Emily Reed as beneficiary. The ink flowed smoothly. No tremble in my hand. Just a clean stroke across the old name. Now here, he said, tapping the next line. You're designating primary inheritance to the Northern Colorado Youth Scholarship Foundation. Secondary goes to the Denver Homeless Outreach Initiative. My eyes scanned the words. Maria would have approved. She used to say, if we ever come into anything, let's put it where it matters, where it grows. I signed again. The sound of the pen against paper was quiet. Final. Power of attorney, Martin continued. You'll revoke it from Emily and name your executor as a neutral third party. My office can handle that if you'd like. I nodded. That'd be best. Each page brought a strange mix of grief and relief, like burying something that had long since died, but never been laid to rest. The final page came, a signature and a date. I pressed the pen down once more. Martin gathered the documents and slipped them into a manila folder. "You've done the hard part," he said. I didn't respond right away. I just looked out the window behind his desk. Snow had started to fall soft, quiet flakes that made the world outside seem clean and untouched. "She'll find out someday," I said. "She might," he agreed. "But by then, she'll understand the choices you made or she won't. Either way, it won't change the fact that they were yours." I nodded, slowly rising from my chair. "Thank you." He stood and offered his hand again. "You're not the first parent I've seen come in here with a broken heart, but you're one of the few who actually did something about it." I stepped into the cold outside, with the folder tucked under my arm. The snow gathered in my hair, dusted my shoulders. I didn't brush it off. Let it settle. Let it cover everything. Something new was beginning. It started with an empty notebook I found in the back of the hall closet. Leather-bound, still sealed in plastic. Maria had given it to me on my 60th birthday. "In case you ever want to write things down," she'd said, tucking it under my dinner plate like a secret gift. Back then, I'd laughed, said I wasn't much of a writer. She just smiled, that knowing way she did, and said, "You will be, someday." I opened it that evening, at the kitchen table, under the yellow light of the same lamp we bought at a flea market the year Emily turned 9. The pen felt foreign in my hand at first, but then the words came, steady and deliberate, like pouring concreteslo, but meant to last. June 12th, 1997. Maria's funeral. Emily wouldn't let go of my hand. I didn't let her see me cry. I wrote about the lunchboxes I packed, the times I went without so she didn't have to. The nights I stayed up fixing a leaky faucet in a house too old for single-parent living. I wrote about the school plays, the awards, the tears over broken friendships. I wrote about the dress she wanted for prom. How I took on an extra drywall job just so she could have the one with the open back and silver beads. January 3rd, 2012. Emily called me her hero, said no one had ever worked harder for her. Then I wrote about the change, the silence, the cold texts, the dinners where she couldn't meet my eyes, the first time she forgot my birthday, the way she started parroting Travis's words like they were gospel. August 29th, 2023. She said I never made her feel seen, that I was always emotionally distant, that her husband understood her better than I ever did. I didn't censor any of it, didn't try to make myself look better or her worse. I just told the truth. Page after page, I documented not just what I gave but what was taken, piece by piece, until the love I'd spent a lifetime building felt like it had been sold off in installments. The journal became my reckoning, a way to prove, if not to her, then at least to myself, that I had tried, that I had loved her as hard and as long as I could, and that somewhere along the way, it simply stopped being enough. Chapter 14. The flash drive. The camera blinked, red recording. I sat at my desk in the quiet of my study. The journal closed beside me, the room lit only by the desk lamp and the slow, steady glow of the computer screen. I adjusted my collar once, cleared my throat, and looked straight into the lens. "Hi, Emily," I began, voice calm, but not unshaken. "If you're watching this, I'm gone. Not gone like out for groceries. Gone in the real way, the kind you don't come back from." I paused. Not for drama, just to find the strength to keep going. I wanted to leave you something you couldn't talk over, something you couldn't twist into a story about how I failed you. I held up the journal. This is the truth. All of it. The sacrifices, the decisions, the nights I lay awake wondering if I was doing enough. The moments I failed, yes, but also the times I got it right when I showed up, when I held you, when I gave you everything I had without hesitation. I set the book down, exhaled. I'm not trying to make you feel guilty, Emily. I'm trying to help you remember, because somewhere along the way, you forgot who I was, or maybe you never really knew. Maybe I made it too easy. Maybe I should have said no more often. Made you work for the things I handed over with trembling hands. The words hung in the room, thick with years. I know Travis told you I was cold, distant, but what you call silence, I called stability. What you call distance, I called discipline. You see, love doesn't always sound like fairy tales. Sometimes it sounds like a furnace kicking on during a snowstorm, or a car warming up at 5 a.m., so you don't have to wait in the cold. My throat tightened. I'm not bitter, Emily. I'm just done apologizing for being a father you never bothered to understand. I reached for the flash drive, still recording. This video isn't a plea. It's a record. Because someday, when the noise dies down and the house is quiet, I want you to hear my voice again. Not from memory, from truth. I clicked stop recording. And for the first time in months, I felt light. Like maybe I'd finally said everything I needed to say. I started with Maria. Her letter came easiest. Not because I didn't cry through half of it, I did, but because she'd always been the person I talked to when things didn't make sense. Even now, years after cancer took her body but not her presence, I could still hear her voice when I picked up a pen. My love, I wrote, I don't know where you are, but I hope it's somewhere warm, with trees, with coffee, with peace. I told her about Emily. Not just what she'd said, but who she'd become. How the laughter had left her voice. How her eyes seemed colder every time we met. I told her about Travis. About the things he'd planted and how fast they took root. About how I didn't know when I stopped being a father and started being a burden. I kept my promise, Maria. I took care of her. I never stopped trying. But she doesn't want me anymore. And I think, maybe, it's time I stopped waiting for her to change her mind. I sealed that one with trembling hands. Then I wrote to friends, those still living, and those long gone. To Jerry, who used to sneak me sandwiches during night shifts at the gas station. Thank you for making the hard years bearable. To Beth, our old neighbor, who used to leave casseroles at our door when Maria was in hospice. You reminded me what kindness looks like when no one's watching. I wrote to a student I hadn't seen in 20 years. A kid who flunked every test but turned up at graduation just to shake my hand. I told him he'd made me feel like I mattered. And last, I wrote to Emily. But not the Emily in the condo. Not the woman with tight lips and colder eyes. I wrote to the child in the daisy dress. The girl who danced in the kitchen and whispered I love you into my chest as she drifted off to sleep. If you ever come back, I hope you find someone still worth knowing. The letters sat stacked on my kitchen table like folded parts of myself. Closure didn't come in a single moment. It came in ink, in memory, in deciding which truths to let go of and which to preserve. Chapter 16. The Final Visit. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want to give her the chance to say no. I just picked up the photo album I'd spent weeks rebuilding copies of old snapshots, printed and labeled with dates she'd long forgotten. I wrapped it in plain brown paper and tied it with twine. Simple. Quiet. Final. Her condo looked the same as always. Polished floors. Stark furniture. Not a single trace of childhood in sight. I knocked once, then twice. No answer. Just as I turned to leave, the door swung open. "Oh," she said, clearly surprised. "Hey, Dad. What are you doing here?" "I was in the area," I lied, holding out the gift. "Just wanted to drop this off. Something I thought you might want someday." End quote. Endum. Ein quote. Criart. Ein quote. End quote. I was in the area. She glanced at the package, barely touching it as she took it from my hands. "Okay, well, thanks. I'm actually heading out. Travis and I are meeting some friends for drinks." She said it like I was a delivery man, not her father. I nodded. "Of course. Don't let me keep you." She looked past me down the hallway, already thinking of other things. I'll look at this later." "No rush," I said, stepping back. "I just wanted to say goodbye." That made her pause. Goodbye? I mean for now, I added, softening the edge. I've got some things I need to take care of. Just figured I'd swing by. Right, she said, distracted. Her phone buzzed. She glanced down and tapped out a response without looking up again. Thanks for stopping by. She didn't ask what the gift was. Didn't ask where I was going. She didn't even look me in the eyes. I watched her disappear into her condo, door closing softly behind her. No hug. No lingering words. Outside, the afternoon sun hit the windshield of my truck, blinding for a moment. I climbed in, started the engine, and sat for a long minute, hands on the wheel. She hadn't noticed, but I hadn't expected her to. Not anymore. Still, I left the photo album. One last chance. One last reminder of the life she no longer seemed to remember. And I drove away without looking back. The clerk behind the glass didn't even blink as she slid the documents back to me, each one stamped with the red certainty of state approval. Her hands moved with the kind of efficiency that told me this wasn't the first time someone had come in to sever ties dressed as legal procedure. That's everything, Mr. Reed. The revised will is now recorded with the county. Your power of attorney revocation is also on file. If anyone attempts to act on your behalf, they'll be turned away unless you reassign it. Thank you, I said, my voice steady. Do you want a certified copy? Yes. Several. She handed them over, neatly paper-clipped and sealed. As I walked out into the brisk air, I realized the folder I held weighed less than my grief, but far more than I'd expected. No parade, no lightning strike, just ink, signatures, and quiet finality. It wasn't about spite. Not really. It was about control. About making sure my story ended on my terms, not in a nursing home picked out by a son-in-law with dollar signs for pupils, not with Emily calling only when decisions needed to be made or checks needed to be written. I'd given her everything, the foundation, the scaffolding, and the roof. And when it came time to honor that effort, she'd decided I was disposable. So I made it official. I stood outside the county clerk's building, folder tucked under one arm, watching the wind dance with a stray leaf across the sidewalk. For a moment, I thought about Maria. She'd have been gentle about it, of course. She would have asked me to wait, to give Emily more time. But she also would have understood. You did right by her, I imagined her saying. But now it's time to do right by yourself. I got into my truck, turned the ignition, and glanced at the passenger seat where the flash drive sat in a padded envelope, labeled with Emily's name in my handwriting. Someday, someone would hand it to her. And on that day, she'd understand just how permanent, official enough could be. I pulled away from the curb, headed home. One last step left. It was time to sell the house. Chapter 18. The retirement move. I listed the house without fanfare. No announcement. No for sale sign staked into the lawn. Just one discreet call to Brian Connor, a real estate agent recommended by Martin. He spoke in efficient phrases and promised a quiet listing with vetted buyers. You'll have an offer within the week, he said. Maybe less. He wasn't wrong. 3 days later, a cash offer landed on my desk above asking, no contingencies. Closing in 10. I accepted with a nod, signed where I was told. And just like that, the house Maria and I built piece by piece was no longer mine. Packing was slow, not for lack of boxes, but because every drawer held echoes. A birthday card, with toddler handwriting. Maria's recipe cards, still dusted with flour. Emily's third-grade science fair medal, tucked behind a bag of rubber bands. I kept what mattered, and let the rest go. The hardest room was the master bedroom. Maria's scarf still hung behind the door. I held it to my face once, then folded it into my suitcase. I left the house at dawn, locked the door, slid the keys into a sealed envelope for the new owner, and walked down the front steps without turning back. I thought I'd cry, but I didn't. I'd done my mourning in stages, over years. By the time the moving truck rumbled out of the neighborhood, I was already miles down the road. The cabin I bought sat at the edge of a mountain town no one in my old life had ever visited. The kind of place with a 2-lane road, a diner that knew your name by the second visit, and a library that smelled like cedar and old paper. It was small, 1-bedroom, a stone fireplace, pine trees in every direction, but it felt like mine. The first night there, I made a fire and poured a glass of scotch. Outside, the wind rattled the branches gently, like fingers brushing wind chimes. The quiet wasn't empty. It was earned. I sat in the warmth, watching the flames curl upward, and thought, I'm not starting over. I'm starting clean. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't hurt. Peace didn't come all at once. It came in small rituals, the morning cup of coffee on the porch, the rhythm of sweeping pine needles off the steps, the slow, deliberate way life moved in a town untouched by hurry. I wasn't sure what I was looking for when I got here. Solitude, maybe. Closure. Some clean break from the past. What I found was purpose, and it wore smaller shoes than I expected. It started with a flyer at the post office. Volunteers needed. Mountain Ridge Elementary. Reading Buddies program. I stared at it for a while, hand resting on the bulletin board, heart hammering like I'd just seen something too familiar to ignore. The school was small, cheerful, underfunded, and full of kids who needed a little more than what their teachers had time to give. I didn't say much during my first visit, just listened. Read a few pages from Charlotte's Web to a girl named Layla, who smiled with all her teeth and asked if I could come back the next day. I did. Soon, I was showing up twice a week, then 3, helping with math homework, offering life advice to a 10-year-old who swore he wanted to be an astronaut but didn't know how to divide fractions. I fixed a broken bookshelf in the library, helped a 5th grader draft his first real story, and spent lunch one day teaching 2 boys how to tie a necktie for a school event. They called me Mr. D, short for Mr. Daniel, but also somehow a name that felt new. Not Dad, not burden, just Mr. D, and that was enough. They listened when I spoke. They smiled when I arrived. They didn't need my money, my sacrifice, or my guilt. They just needed my time, and I had plenty of it now. Maria would have loved it here. She always said I had a soft spot for the underdogs. I think she knew, long before I did, that I'd spend my later years trying to give away all the love I never got to finish offering. In those kids' eyes, I wasn't a failure. I was a mentor, a helper, someone who showed up, day after day, because he wanted to. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I mattered again. Chapter 20. The news spreads. It started with a missed call, then 2, then 5 in a row. I'd turned the phone off weeks ago and left it in the drawer of my nightstand, tucked away with old receipts and expired warranties. There was no one I wanted to hear from. And silence, I'd found, was better than disappointment. Emily tried calling again that week. This time, it was about the house. "Have you heard from your father?" she asked my cousin Denise, who lived 3 counties over and hadn't seen me since Maria's funeral. "No," Denise replied, "but I heard he sold the house and moved. Quietly. Didn't tell anyone." Emily blinked. "Wait. He sold it?" "Yes," Denise said, voice tight. "Signed it over. Gone like smoke." The next day, Emily called my old lawyer. Martin's assistant politely informed her that all estate decisions had been made and were legally binding. "I'm sorry, Miss Reed," she said, "but your name is no longer listed on any relevant documents." Emily's voice cracked. "What do you mean? I'm not on anything." "I mean," the assistant repeated gently, "your father made it clear he no longer wished to have family obligations. Everything has been redistributed, finalized. He cut ties." The words sank in slowly. He cut ties. She left 10 voicemails that week. All went unanswered. A few were angry, sharp-edged, and frantic. Others sounded softer, almost unsure. "Dad," she said in one, "can we just Talk. I didn't mean everything I said. But by then, the signal no longer reached where I was. Not metaphorically, literally. The cabin was too far into the mountains, and I never bothered installing Wi-Fi. No need. The world I left behind had its chance. Emily scoured my old neighborhood for clues, but the neighbors didn't know much. He left one morning, seemed happy, one of them told her. Said he had a new chapter to write. Told me to take care of the lawn one last time. She checked the mailbox empty. She sent a letter returned, unopened. And when she asked Denise if she thought I'd come back, Denise simply said, "I don't think he's running, honey. I think he's finally resting." And somewhere far above the chaos she created, I sat beneath pine trees, teaching a little girl how to read because of Winn-Dixie. My phone didn't ring, and I didn't miss it. The envelope was thick official, cream-colored with embossed lettering, the kind of thing that announced itself as important before you even opened it. Emily sat at the kitchen counter in their sleek condo, legs crossed under a marble island, coffee growing cold in a ceramic mug with "Hustle Harder" scrawled across the side. Travis had left early, something about a breakfast meeting with a potential investor. She hadn't asked questions. The envelope was addressed to her full name, Emily Reed Whitmore. She tore it open casually at first, expecting some tax form or maybe a transfer of property related to her father's house, something tedious but beneficial. But her eyes stopped cold halfway down the first page. To Ms. Emily Reed Whitmore. This letter serves as formal notification that, as per the revised estate plan of Daniel Everett Reed, executed and witnessed on date, you have been fully removed as a beneficiary. This includes, but is not limited to, revocation of all powers of attorney, medical proxy designations, financial oversight, and inheritance rights. She reread it. Once. Twice. The words didn't change. Gone. All of it. She flipped to the back. The new beneficiaries listed were two nonprofits she'd never heard of. One for youth scholarships, another for homeless outreach. There was no message, no note. Just paperwork and legality. Clean, cold, final. Her stomach turned. She dug through her phone, opening their last message thread. Dozens of texts she'd sent, all unread. The final one, a month ago. Are you seriously just going to disappear? Still no answer. Her mind spiraled. He wouldn't do this. Not Dad. He wouldn't cut me out completely. She clutched the paper tighter, breath shallow, heart racing. She thought about the wedding he helped pay for, the down payment he'd quietly wired into her account, the thousands he'd given without question. She hadn't even said thank you most of the time. Her eyes burned. Whether from fury or shame, she couldn't tell. Then she saw it, tucked in at the bottom in neat, impersonal print. These decisions reflect the decedent's explicit intentions, made of sound mind and body. No challenge will be considered valid in probate without cause. No cause, no chance, no appeal. It wasn't just a cut, it was a goodbye. Chapter 22. Travis's Real Agenda. At first, Emily didn't connect the dots. The estate papers shook her too badly to see anything but the insult of it. But over the next few days, little moments resurfaced. Fleeting comments, sidelong glances, choices that used to feel like support but now curdled with suspicion. Travis barely reacted when she told him. Well, he'd said over dinner, slicing his steak with mechanical precision. Maybe this is a good thing. Less mess. Less dependency. Less what? She asked. He shrugged. You were always waiting around for your dad's help. Maybe now we can finally move forward. Clean break. She stared at him. He was my father. Travis set his fork down slowly. And he never respected you. Never listened. All those years of emotional neglect? You said it yourself. You said it yourself. It echoed. Suddenly, too rehearsed. Too practiced. That's when it began to click. He'd been the one who pushed her to have the talk with her dad. encouraged her to confront him, to accuse him of being emotionally distant. He called it reclaiming your narrative. When she'd raged after the dinner meltdown, Travis had handed her the wine and told her she was finally standing up for herself. She used to think it was love. Now it looked a lot like manipulation. She started digging not deeply at first, just enough to confirm a feeling. Bank records, shared accounts, and there it was. 2 months ago, Travis had transferred $22,000 from their joint account into a separate investment portfolio. She hadn't noticed. Why would she? She'd assumed it was their money. But it wasn't just the money. There were emails too. A thread between Travis and a real estate lawyer she didn't recognize. He'd inquired hypothetical about inheriting property if a parent passes away without a revised will. That email was dated a week before her father's estate revision had gone through. Her chest tightened. She stared at the screen, her heart thudding like a drum. He didn't just cheer on the distance between her and her father. He built it, fed it, weaponized it, because he thought there'd be a payday at the end. Now there was nothing. No money, no house, no backup plan. And suddenly, for the first time in her adult life, Emily Reed Whitmore realized just how truly alone she'd made herself, and how quickly a husband could turn into a stranger. It all came crashing down faster than Emily could process. One moment, she was scrolling through job listings with trembling fingers, and the next, 2 men in suits knocked on the condo door, flashing badges with clipped voices and federal authority. Is Travis Whitmore present? He was. In the study, wearing his usual smug calm, AirPods in, talking about equity rounds and upside projections, like the walls weren't closing in, but they were. They cuffed him in the hallway. He didn't resist, didn't speak, just looked at her once blank, like they hadn't just built a life together. She watched him disappear into a black SUV with tinted windows. It felt quiet afterward, not peaceful, just hollow. The charges came out that evening. Embezzlement, wire fraud, investor manipulation. He'd siphoned hundreds of thousands from clients, falsified reports, and moved money through offshore accounts. One headline called him a polished con in a tailored suit. Another dubbed her the oblivious wife. The condo wasn't theirs. Not really. Rented furniture, overdue rent, credit cards maxed in her name. Joint savings? Gone. Even her car was leased under one of Travis's LLCs, now frozen under investigation. The friends she once bragged to at brunch didn't return her calls. The family she'd kept at arm's length for years had long since stopped checking in. And the only person she might have turned towel, she'd burned that bridge with a scream she couldn't unsay. I wish you weren't my father. She sat in the kitchen, light off. The same mug of cold coffee, still untouched on the counter. The same one from the day the letter arrived. She picked it up, threw it against the wall. It shattered. Loud and sharp and too late. There was no one left to blame. Not anymore. And in the stillness of her unraveling world, she finally realized something painful. She had mistaken guidance for control, love for silence, stability for absence. And the man who had given her everything had walked away quietly. Finally. Completely. Chapter 24. The flash drive arrives. It came in a plain manila envelope. No return address. Just her name written neatly in black ink. Emily Redknott Whitmore. Not hyphenated. Just the name he gave her. Inside was a flash drive, wrapped in a printed note from her father's attorney. Per the wishes of Daniel Reed, this is to be delivered upon confirmation of disinheritance and legal closure. She stared at it for a long time. Her hands didn't want to touch it. Her heart didn't want to feel what was coming. But something deeper, older forced her to plug it into her laptop. The screen flickered. Then, her father appeared. He was sitting at a desk she hadn't seen in years, the old study back home. With the window that overlooked the garden, he looked older, tired, but steady. "Hi, Emily," he began. voice soft but unwavering. If you're watching this, well, I guess the lawyers did their job. She felt her throat tighten. I didn't leave this to guilt you or to hurt you. I left it because I wanted you to hear me. One last time. Without the noise. Without Travis in your ear. Without the distance. He lifted a small, leather-bound book. This is the journal. I wrote it so you'd know what I never said out loud. Every sacrifice. Every joy. Every disappointment. It's all there. No edits. No excuses. She covered her mouth as tears began to fall. You said I never showed you love, he continued. But love isn't loud, Emily. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's a tired man making dinner at midnight. Or working 2 jobs so you can wear the shoes everyone else had. Or sitting alone at your birthday table, still saving you a seat. He paused, looked away. When he looked back, his eyes were glassy. I'm not angry anymore. I just hope that when the noise dies down and you're standing in the silence, you'll remember who I was and who you were before all this. His final words were soft. I loved you, from your first breath to my last. I just wish you'd loved me back before it was too late. The screen went black. Emily sat frozen. Tears poured silently onto her lap. No more justifications. No more Travis. No more lies. Just truth. And silence. And grief. The journal came in a second envelope, delivered by courier 2 days after the flash drive. It was worn already, edges softened by use, the leather darkened by time and touch. Inside the cover, his handwriting waited firm, familiar, unpretentious. For Emily. The real one. The one who used to laugh without restraint and call me Dad, like it meant everything. Maybe she'll read this someday. She sat on the floor of the now empty condo. Travis's things gone. Silence hanging heavy and open to the first page. The memories came like waves. Your first steps were in the living room. You tried to run before you could walk, just like always. Maria cried. I took photos with shaking hands. Her breath hitched. She turned the page. I used to sneak notes into your lunchbox. You'd pretend not to see them, but I'd find them folded in your pocket, smoothed out and read. She wiped her eyes, then read more. When Maria died, I didn't know how to be a mother and a father, but I tried. God, I tried. You were so quiet that first year, and I thought if I just kept the machine running, you'd find your smile again. The entries weren't polished, they weren't poetic, but they were raw, real. Pages filled with sacrifice, doubt, moments of love she never saw and never acknowledged. And then she found the letter, tucked near the end. Emily, I don't know when this will reach you, if ever. I just need you to know I never stopped being your father. Not when you forgot my birthday. Not when you accused me of being absent. Not even when you said you wished I wasn't yours. You were mine. Always. And I carried that with pride even when it hurt. I hope you find peace someday. Not because I need it, but because you do. Because whatever fire made you push me away, it will burn everything if you let it. And I'd rather be ash than watch you become that kind of cold. Love. Dad. She dropped the book. Let it thud against the floor as her body folded over her knees. And for the first time since it was too late, she wept. Not just for the father she lost, but for the daughter she chose not to be. Chapter 26. The Drive to Nowhere. The next morning she got in the car and drove without telling anyone. She didn't pack, didn't shower, just grabbed her keys and journal and started heading north. Toward home, if she could still call it that. The road twisted through old neighborhoods like ghost trails. Each turn brought back flashes. Her bike on the sidewalk, her father raking leaves while she jumped into the piles. His voice calling out to her from the porch. Dinner's ready, Em. But when she pulled up to the house, the truth hit hard. It wasn't theirs anymore. Fresh paint covered the shutters. The porch swing was gone. New planters lined the walkway. A kid's toy truck sat on the lawn. A woman she didn't recognize stepped out to check the mail, glanced at Emily's car, and tilted her head curiously. Emily got out slowly, clutching the journal to her chest. "Can I help you?" the woman asked kindly. Emily stared up at the house at what used to be her bedroom window, now trimmed with unfamiliar curtains. "My dad used to live here," she said quietly. "This was our home." The woman smiled softly. "Oh, you must be one of the daughter's friends. The realtor said he didn't have any living family." The words hit like a fist. No living family. Not estranged. Not complicated. Just gone. Removed. Erased. "I'm sorry," the woman added. "He seemed like a good man. Took good care of the place. Left it spotless. We love it here." Emily nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Yeah," she managed. "He was a good man." She stood there for a long time, not moving. The wind lifted her hair, the pine trees rustled faintly behind the house, and somewhere beneath the soil, old footprints remained. But the man who once walked them had made sure he wouldn't be followed. She turned, got back in her car, and drove away. Nowhere to go, no one to call. Just the road and the truth. And the weight of what she'd finally realized far too late. It took her days to write it. Not because she didn't know what to say, but because every word felt like digging through wreckage. She started over a dozen times, filling crumpled pages with apologies that felt too small for what she'd done. In the end, she kept it simple. "Dad, I was wrong. About everything. About you. About the love you gave. I see it. Know in the silence, in the loss, in what I destroyed. I know I can't undo what I said, and I know I have no right to ask anything of you. But I miss you, not because I'm alone, but because I finally understand who you were, and I'm so sorry I didn't see it when it mattered. If there's any part of you still open to hearing from me, please, write back. Even one word. Just to know I haven't lost you forever. Love always. Emily." She wrote the address by memory. His handwriting had been etched into her brain since childhood, blocky, neat, all capital letters. She pressed the stamp carefully, took a deep breath, and dropped it into the mailbox. For 5 days, she waited. Every knock at the door made her heart stutter. Every passing truck felt like it might be his. On the 6th day, the envelope came back. Same creases, same ink, but now stamped in stark red ink. Return to sender. No forwarding address. No one had opened it. No one had read her words. She turned it over slowly in her hands. For a long moment, she just sat at the table, staring at the rejection, at the silence he'd chosen. Her apology hadn't been ignored. It had been declined. And that, somehow, hurt more than the goodbye. Chapter 28. Daniel reflects. The cabin was quiet. Not silent quiet in the way only nature knows how to be. Pine needles rustled in the breeze outside. The fire crackled in the hearth, sending occasional sparks upward like stars trying to escape. Daniel sat in his armchair, wrapped in a worn flannel blanket, the journal resting on his lap. He hadn't written in it for a few weeks now. There wasn't much left to say. He'd said it all. Outside, the mountains stretched endlessly, unmoved by the dramas of the past. Here, he had no title, no labels. Not dad, not widower, just Daniel. A man with weathered hands, a quiet mind, and a heart that had finally stopped breaking. He'd heard about Travis. Word had gotten around through the local paper's odd little crime blotter. He didn't celebrate it, just nodded, folded the page, and fed it to the fire. He hadn't turned his phone back on, hadn't checked for mail. He'd made his choice, and choices, he'd learned, were sacred things. Once made with clarity, they should be honored. He thought about Maria often. Her voice still lived here, especially in the evenings. She would have liked the cabin, would have made curtains, planted herbs by the window. And Emily? He missed the child she used to be, the one with skinned knees and an unstoppable giggle. He mourned that version of her deeply. But the woman she became, he had let her go. Not in anger, not in punishment, but in peace. Sometimes, letting go was the last act of love a person had left to give. He leaned back, listening to the fire settle. His breathing slowed. He didn't feel regret, just acceptance. Because he had lived his life honestly, loved deeply, given all he had. And now, at the end of it, he had something few people ever find. Stillness. Not the kind born from loneliness, the kind born from knowing you gave it everything you had, and you walked away whole. And in that quiet mountain cabin, surrounded by trees older than time, Daniel smiled gently to himself and let the world keep spinning without him. The word family used to feel like something sacred to Daniel, something tied to bloodlines, birth certificates, hospital rooms, and last names. But out here, tucked away in the stillness of pine-scented mornings and quiet purpose, that definition had changed. It came in the form of backpack zippers, half-eaten granola bars, crayon drawings, and a sea of voices that called him Mr. D, like it was a title of honor. He volunteered at the school 4 days a week now, helped with reading groups, sat in on science projects, refereed the occasional dodgeball game when the coach was out sick, and every Friday, without fail, a little line of children would form outside his cabin, each with a book in hand and a story to share. Daniel kept hot cocoa ready, extra marshmallows, a rule he'd never had the heart to enforce. There was Jonah, who had lost his dad the year before and liked to sit silently by the fire, just listening. Ava, who wrote poems on napkins and insisted on reading them aloud with theatrical flair. And Mateo, who called Daniel his bonus grandpa, because his real one lived too far away. They didn't ask him for anything extravagant, just time, presence, warmth. One evening, as the sky turned orange over the ridge and the children trickled home, Jonah lingered behind. "Mr. D," he asked, eyes uncertain, "do you ever wish you had a different family?" Daniel considered it. "No," he said finally, "but I think sometimes life gives us a second chance to build one. And if we're lucky, it might even be better than the first." Jonah smiled. "I think this one's pretty great." Daniel chuckled, ruffled the boy's hair, and watched as he darted down the trail toward home. He stood on the porch a while longer after that. The air smelled like pine and distant snow. His hands, once worn from work and grief, now felt lighter, steadier. Not because time had erased the pain, but because something softer had filled its place. He hadn't replaced what he lost. He'd grown something new. And in their laughter, their trust, their bright eyes full of questions, Daniel finally saw the reflection of the father he had always hoped to be. Chapter 30. The final page. He waited until spring. The drive to the cemetery was long, but quiet. Just him, the mountain air, and the journal resting on the passenger seat, worn now, edges frayed, pages full. It was time. Maria's grave hadn't changed, but the world around it had. The grass had grown thicker, the flowers more wild. There was a small wooden bench nearby now, placed there by the city last fall. Daniel sat, journal in hand, and exhaled. "Hi, love," he said softly. Been a while. The words didn't feel heavy. They felt natural, like coming home. He opened the journal one last time, flipping to the final page. A single entry, written the night before. "I kept my promise, Maria. I gave her everything. And when there was nothing left to give, I let go with grace. I wish you'd seen the cabin. You'd have loved the quiet. I even planted those dumb daisies you used to talk to like they were people. I found peace, Maria. Real peace. It took longer than I hoped, but it came. And in the end, I wasn't alone. Not really." He placed the journal gently at the base of her headstone, wrapped in a weatherproof pouch, weighed down with a flat stone she would have called ugly but honest. Standing, he brushed off his jeans, placed one hand on the stone, and said the words he'd been holding for years. I did everything I could. I kept our promise. I'm tired now, but I'm okay. He kissed his fingers, touched them to her name, and turned toward the path leading back through the trees. The breeze picked up as he walked, warm and earthy. The birds were louder than usual. Or maybe he'd just been quiet long enough to finally hear them. Daniel didn't look back, not because he forgot her, but because he'd finally remembered himself. And as the trail disappeared into green and gold light, the past stayed gently behind him, and the rest of his story waited, still unwritten. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.